It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite the skin but sank into the bones, the kind of morning where even stray dogs curled tighter into corners, seeking a warmth that didn't exist. The sky hung low with a heavy gray pressing silence onto the streets like a blanket soaked in frost. She had been walking for over an hour, her arms cradling a small, shivering body wrapped in a fleece blanket so thin it might as well have been paper. Her coat, oversized and missing 2 buttons, flapped loosely around them both. Every few steps, she adjusted the child's position, holding him closer, whispering gently into his ear, as if words alone could generate heat. His cheek against her chest was pale and damp, his breath shallow. She had no destination, just a hope that somewhere someone would let them sit for a while, not to beg, not to ask for food. Just to warm up. The bakery stood on the corner, its windows glowing with that soft yellow light that seems to promise comfort. Inside, people stood in line, their hands wrapped around steaming cups, their shoulders relaxed. She paused at the door, glanced down at her son, then stepped in quietly, almost apologetically, as if asking permission from the air itself. The warmth inside hit her like a wave. It wasn't even hot, but compared to the frozen air outside, it felt like a miracle. She found a small bench near the wall, away from the others, and sat down carefully. She kept her eyes low, unthreatening. She wasn't there to bother anyone. She just needed 5 minutes, maybe 10, just enough to bring his color back. He wasn't speaking anymore. He hadn't said a word since they left the shelter that morning. His head leaned heavily on her collarbone, his tiny fingers tucked inside the folds of her sweater. She gently rocked him, humming under her breath, trying to mask the trembling in her own body. No one looked at her directly, but a few eyes glanced her way. A couple sitting near the window exchanged a comment in hushed tones. One woman clutched her purse a little tighter. And then, behind the counter, the owner noticed her. He didn't shout. He didn't ask if she needed help. He walked out from behind the glass case of pastries, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression already carved into stone. His voice was flat, businesslike, not cruel, but utterly indifferent. "You can't be in here," he said. She looked up slowly, her lips parting, slightly as if to form a word that didn't come. She shifted the boy on her lap and tried to explain, quietly, that they just needed to sit a few minutes. The cold was getting to him, that he wasn't feeling well. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "You're not buying anything. Please leave," he said, louder now. A few heads turned. She saw them, saw the flicker of embarrassment in their eyes, the way discomfort made them pretend to sip coffee or scroll through their phones. No one spoke. No one stood up. Her child let out a faint sigh against her chest, almost like a whisper of sleep. She looked down at him. His eyes were half closed, unfocused. "Sir, please," she tried again. "I'm not asking for—" "I said out," he interrupted, stepping closer. "This isn't a shelter. You can't just sit here. I have customers." She stood, slowly, carefully, holding the child against her with both arms. Her knees wobbled slightly as she rose. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just held her son closer and walked toward the door, past the smell of butter and bread, past the warmth, past the quiet judgment dressed up as polite silence. She stepped back into the wind. The blast of cold hit her like a punishment. Her ears stung. Her eyes watered. She kept walking, not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't stop. If she sat down now, she wasn't sure she'd be able to get up again. The child's weight was heavier than usual, not in size, in silence. He wasn't talking. He wasn't even humming to himself like he usually did. She pressed her lips to his forehead. It was cold, too cold, and for the first time that morning, she felt something sharp curl in her chest. Fear, not the kind of fear she had learned to live with. Not the fear of not making rent or skipping dinner or walking home in the dark. This was something else. It was in the way his head leaned too far into her shoulder, in how quiet he was, in how long he had kept his eyes closed. She didn't know much about medicine, But she knew children shouldn't be that still. She thought about going back to the shelter, but it was already closed for the day. Thought about knocking on someone's door, but who would answer? She had been invisible. Too long to believe in sudden kindness. She had no money, no phone, and now, maybe, no time. She turned down another street, her breath quickening, her steps growing uneven. The city stretched out before her, like a frozen maze of indifference. Her son didn't move, and for the first time, she wondered if the cold would take him before anyone cared enough to stop it. The cold wind pressed harder now, like it had sensed her desperation, and doubled down. Her hands were stiff, numb at the fingertips, arms trembling under the weight of her son, who had grown almost entirely limp against her. She adjusted his position, tucking the edge of the blanket around his neck, but it did little. He didn't flinch, didn't shift. His lips were pale, and she noticed a faint trembling in his jaw that wasn't from the cold alone. Something deeper was setting in, something she had no name for, but could feel in the marrow of her bones. She told herself he was just tired, that he hadn't slept well, that once they found shelter, once she found somewhere, anywhere, warm, he'd be okay. But her feet kept moving without direction, and the city around her kept looking away. She stopped at a small pharmacy, its windows fogged with indoor heat and fluorescent lights. Inside, a man behind the counter glanced up as she entered, his expression cautious. She walked slowly, carefully, toward the front, not to browse the shelves, but to ask a question she had no dignity left to soften. Her voice was low, hoarse. "I'm sorry to bother you. I just need somewhere warm for a moment. My son, he's not feeling well. Just 5 minutes." The man didn't respond right away. He looked her over, from her boots worn to the sole, to the child, cradled in her arms. Then he looked away. "We can't have people lingering. Store policy, I'm sorry." She blinked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not asking for anything. He's really not well. Please, we're not allowed. If something happens here, it's on us. You need to try somewhere else." She nodded, but the movement was slow, like her body didn't fully belong to her anymore. Her arms were burning, her knees ached. She turned and walked out without another word, back into the wind. Somewhere else, always somewhere else. She kept walking, across the street, around the corner, her mind blank except for one growing refrain. "He's not okay, he's not okay." She saw a small grocery store and pushed through the doors. The heater near the entrance was a blast of salvation, and she stood under it for 1 full second before the cashier at the front desk, a woman no older than herself, called out sharply, "You can't stand there. You're blocking the entrance." She didn't even try to explain this time. She stepped out of the way, found a corner near the canned goods, and sat down carefully, holding her son across her lap. A few customers passed her, but no one stopped. The child made a faint sound, almost a whimper, and then went still again. The cashier left her station, came around and stood a few feet away. "You can't sit here. We're not a shelter. I know, He needs a minute. Please, you need to leave. Now." "I'm sorry, but I'll have to call someone if you don't." There was no anger in her voice, only protocol. The mother stood slower this time, like her body was made of stone. She pulled the child close again and left without looking back. The world outside had changed nothing. The wind still carved into her face, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She walked and walked, past people in coats thicker than hers, past buses she couldn't afford, past cafes and salons and bank branches glowing with artificial warmth she would never touch. Nobody saw her, not really. A woman carrying her child, eyes glazed, hair pulled back in a messy knot, moving through the city like a ghost wearing skin. The boy made a soft sound once, as if trying to speak, but his lips barely moved. She looked down at him and felt a scream building in her chest, but it had nowhere to go. She tried not to think about how long it had been since he ate. She tried not to remember the fever he had the night before, the one that made his skin hot and his breathing shallow. She had given him the last of the children's medicine she had, broken into 2 doses to stretch it, praying it would be enough. But it hadn't been. That was why she left the shelter that morning, because he needed more. He needed care, and even if she had to walk the city to find it, she would. She pulled the blanket tighter around him and looked up the street. On the kid, far distance, she saw a building she recognized, the clinic where she'd gone once, months ago, when he had a rash she couldn't explain. They hadn't been kind there, but they hadn't turned her away either. It wasn't close. Maybe 20 blocks, maybe more, but it was something. She readjusted the weight of the child in her arms, felt the ache in her shoulders, the burning in her back. The street ahead was empty, wind chasing leaves in a dance of silence. She took a step forward, then another. Her feet were soaked from the slush beneath her. Her socks stuck to her skin like wet paper. She didn't know if he would make it to the clinic, but she knew he wouldn't survive the cold. The city never felt so wide. The buildings stretched endlessly in both directions, silent monuments to lives she would never live, warmth she would never afford, doors that never opened for women like her. Every step forward was a silent negotiation with her own body. Her legs ached from the cold and from holding a growing child that no longer clung to her the way he used to. He didn't lift his head to look around, didn't ask when they'd get there, didn't ask anything at all. She tried not to panic, tried not to think about how quiet he had become. Just keep walking, just keep moving. The clinic was too far. She knew that now. But she also knew there was no turning back. She had no other destination, no one waiting, no number to call. She hadn't owned a working phone in over 3 months. What little she had left had gone to food, then diapers, then nothing. One by one, every item she'd once had, her bag, her nice shoes, even her wedding ring, had disappeared in trade for something more urgent. Survival had a price, and love, when lived alone, demanded everything else in return. Her boots were separating at the soles. She could feel the water seep in through the sides, freezing her toes, but she didn't stop. She didn't dare. Each block she passed, she searched for signs, a pharmacy, a public building, a church, anything that looked open. But there were no signs of life. The city had gone quiet in the cold, a world moving indoors while she remained outside. Her son stirred once, letting out a small sigh, and she immediately pulled him higher, speaking to him softly. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just a little longer, okay? We're almost there." She didn't know if he heard her, but speaking kept her grounded. It made her believe in movement, as if her voice could wrap around him and pull him back from wherever he was slipping. She could feel his heartbeat against her chest, faint but there, his breath shallow and quick. She shifted her arm to keep his head upright, trying not to think about how heavy he felt, not in weight, but in absence. It was the stillness that scared her most. People passed her on the street, but they never really looked. One man in a suit brushed past, muttering something under his breath. When her shoulder grazed his, a woman in gym clothes glanced at the bundle in her arms, hesitated, then picked up her pace and crossed the street. She wanted to scream, not for help, but for someone, anyone, to see her, to see that this wasn't laziness, that she wasn't some lost cause. She was a mother, just a mother, trying to keep her child alive. She reached a major intersection, stood on the corner, and waited for the light. The wind swept through the buildings like a knife, slicing across her face and neck. She shielded the child with both arms, her teeth clenched. Her legs trembled now from the cold and exhaustion. Her knees nearly buckled. A horn blared somewhere. She blinked slowly, like waking up in the middle of a nightmare that wouldn't end. On the other side of the street was a bus stop. She walked toward it without thinking, not because she could ride the bus, but because it had a bench and a thin plastic covering. Shelter, temporary. She sat down slowly, legs shaking. Her arms ached so badly she thought she might drop him. But she didn't. She never did. She cradled him tighter, brushed the hair from his forehead. His skin was clammy now. The cold had turned inward. That's what scared her most. The fever was gone, but not because it had passed. Because it had surrendered. His body had stopped fighting. She looked down at him and whispered his name. Once, twice, no response. His lips were tinged with blue. She stood up again. No rest, no time. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than the traffic, louder than the wind. She knew this wasn't exhaustion anymore. This was danger, real danger. She looked around, frantic, now eyes scanning every building, every street sign. That's when she remembered there was a hospital. Not the clinic, bigger, further. But it had to be closer now than the other one. She had passed it before, on the bus, back when she could still afford the fare. She remembered the large glass doors, the blue emergency sign, the security guard, by the entrance. She didn't know how far it was from here, but it was something. She started walking again, faster now, panic overriding pain. Each step was agony, but she didn't stop. Her arms screamed for relief. Her back burned. But her son made a faint sound, and that alone gave her more strength than any muscle ever could. She whispered to him again and again, "Stay with me. I need you to stay with me." Block by block, her legs carried her, past alleyways, past dumpsters, past cars she couldn't afford to ride in. She had never felt more alone, more invisible, more human. She was a mother. No money, no help, no safety net. But she was still walking, still carrying, still trying. And that had to count for something. Even if no one else saw it, she couldn't feel her arms anymore. Only the shape of his body, held in instinct rather than strength, pressing against her chest like an anchor she refused to let go. The hospital was near now. She saw it at the end of the long road, a glass box glowing against the gray afternoon. The emergency sign buzzed in dull blue, and for a moment it felt like hope. But the distance between her and those doors felt impossibly long, like a final trial sent to break her. She gritted her teeth and kept walking. Her legs dragged now, her steps uneven. Her vision blurred at the edges. People passed. Some slowed, none stopped. She whispered to him again. She didn't even know what words were coming out, just sounds. Fragments of prayer and memory and fear, stitched together with breath she barely had. Her mouth was dry, her chest burned. She had not eaten in almost 2 days, but she would have gone 2 more if it meant keeping him warm. That was the thing. People didn't understand. The strength of a mother who had nothing left but still refused to fall, until her body chose for her. It happened in silence. One moment she was standing. The next, her knees gave way and the ground rose to meet her. She twisted mid-fall to keep him from hitting the pavement, cradling his head as she collapsed hard. Onto the frozen sidewalk. Her shoulder hit first, then her hip. The pain shot through her side, but she didn't cry out. Her only thought was of him. She lay on her side, curled around his body, shielding him from the cold concrete with her own. Her breath came out in gasps. Her arms wouldn't lift. Her legs wouldn't move. "Help," she whispered, but the sound didn't carry. She blinked slowly, tried to lift her head. The hospital doors were no more than 20 steps away now. 20 steps! But she couldn't take even one. A shadow passed over her, then another. A voice, muffled. "Is she okay?" Someone knelt down, a man's voice, concerned, but unsure. He touched her shoulder and asked again, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She tried to respond, but her lips barely parted. She forced her eyes open. The man was young. His hands hovered, unsure of where to help. She saw him clearly now. It was the same man who had been in the bakery that morning, standing in line. With his coffee, the one who had looked away when she was told to leave. "I remember you," she said, though the words came out slurred. His face changed. Recognition flickered across it like guilt catching fire. He crouched lower. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know." She wanted to say it didn't matter, that it wasn't his fault, that no one knew. No one ever really knew what it cost. to carry a child through a world that kept its doors shut to the poor, but she couldn't speak. Her body was shutting down. Her arms still clung to her son, who now lay motionless against her chest, his face tucked under her chin. She couldn't feel his breath. "Please," she whispered, "help him, not me. Just him." The man stood up quickly and shouted toward the entrance. A nurse ran out, followed by another. They surrounded her, hands on her shoulders, her back, voices speaking words she couldn't process. Someone took the child from her arms. She flinched, trying to hold on, but her body refused. She felt the warmth of another blanket. Someone lifted her. Her vision spun. "What happened to him?" one of the nurses asked. "He's been freezing for hours," the man said. "I don't think they had anywhere to go. She asked to stay warm this morning. We turned her away. Someone shouted something about a gurney. She couldn't follow the sounds anymore. Everything was slipping." But in that moment, as her son was carried inside, wrapped in medical blankets and rushed through the hospital doors, she exhaled, not because it was over, but because someone finally saw them. She lay on the sidewalk, half conscious, with snow falling gently onto her face. The cold didn't sting anymore. Her arms felt lighter, empty. But there was no panic now, no desperation, just silence, a stillness that came not from peace, but from surrender. And as she closed her eyes, she asked no questions of God or fate, only that he make it through, only that her body had lasted long enough, only that somewhere behind those glass doors, someone else would keep him warm. She woke slowly. The ceiling above her was pale white, with a small crack running across one corner. A dull humming filled the silence, the kind that always exists in hospitals, like a distant machine breathing in the background. Her body ached, in places she didn't know could ache. There was a needle in her arm. Her coat was gone. The blanket draped over her was heavier than anything she had felt in days. Warmth, still foreign, still unfamiliar, pressed into her from all sides. She blinked slowly, trying to remember where she was, what had happened. Then it came back all at once. The street, the hospital, her son. She sat up too fast. The pain hit instantly, a sharp jolt through her side and shoulder, but she didn't care. She looked around the room, then at the door, then down at the space beside her. He wasn't there. The fear returned before she could stop it, rising in her throat like smoke. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out before her feet found the floor. A nurse rushed in, called her by no name, just "ma'am," gently urging her up to stay seated. "Your son is here," she said softly. "He's stable. He's in pediatric care. He's warm. He's safe. You can see him soon." The words didn't fully register at first. She nodded, unable to speak, her hand covering her mouth to keep from making a sound that would break the fragile quiet. The nurse brought water. She drank slowly. Everything hurt, but she welcomed the pain now. It was proof that she was still here, still needed. A doctor came in later, asked her questions she struggled to answer. When was the last time he ate? How long had the fever lasted? Did she have any family, any support? She answered as best she could, said no to most of it. There was no father, no sister, no one. The shelter was full. The food banks had lines she couldn't wait in when her child was sick. She had tried. She had done everything she could think of. Her voice cracked when she said it, but the doctor didn't look away. He nodded, then looked down at the chart in his hands. He told her the boy had suffered from early-stage hypothermia, worsened by an untreated infection. His body had started shutting down to protect itself. If she had arrived any later, the outcome could have been different. His words weren't dramatic, just honest. She asked when she could see him. He said soon, when she was finally taken to the pediatric wing. They wheeled her there in a chair she hadn't asked for, but could not refuse. Her legs still trembled too much. The hallway was quiet, bright. A nurse opened the door to a small room, and there he was, sleeping, hooked to an IV. A warm hat pulled over his ears. A nurse sat beside him, reading a picture book aloud, though he was not awake to hear it. She stood up when the mother entered and gave her space. She sat beside the bed and touched his hand. It was warm. That was all that mattered. He didn't open his eyes, but he moved slightly under her touch. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the back of his small hand, and exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. There were no grand speeches, no miraculous turn of fortune, just a mother sitting beside her child, no longer outside, no longer walking, no longer begging. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, where they would go, if they'd be turned away again when they left this place. But today, her son was alive. Today, someone had said yes, that was enough. Later, when the nurse brought her a sandwich and tea, she said thank you, and meant it more than anyone would ever know. She ate slowly, not because she wanted to savor it, but because she had forgotten how to eat without rushing. The nurse asked if she needed anything else. She said no. She stayed in that chair long into the night. Even after the child drifted deeper into sleep, even after her own body screamed for rest, she didn't want to let go of his hand, not yet. Outside, the forecast warned of another cold front coming through. The streets would freeze again. The bakery lights would still shine behind glass that locked the world out. People would still pass her without seeing. But here, in this small room, behind this thin hospital door, warmth existed. And for once it was not conditional, not earned, not begged for, just given. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she simply stayed still and breathed, holding the hand of the only person in the world who had ever needed her as much as she needed him. And for that moment, it was enough.